2018. As is our custom, we'll begin with an invocation which will be led by Supervisor Alvarez, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance that will be led by Ms. Lascalette, Supervisor Lascalette, and all please rise as you're able.
Let us pray. Most gracious God, thank you for enabling us to gather here today. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to serve this great county. Now as we go about doing the business set forth today, help us to keep you first in everything that we say and do. Bless all of us with the proper knowledge, wisdom, and understanding so that we all may prosper. Most of all, bind us together in a spirit of love, which surpasses all things. It is in your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. Next item on the agenda is the citizen comment period. Go ahead and open up the citizen comment period. Anybody that would like to come forward and address this board may do so now. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the citizen comment period. Next item on the agenda is the new business, agency presentations for the FY 2019-2020 county budget. First one up is our workforce report. Kelly, would you like to come forward?
Good afternoon, members of the board, Mr. Badesky. I'm Kelly Parrish, Director of Human Resources, and I'm pleased to present the workforce report. Before I do get started, I would like to point out that I have provided a hard copy of an HR annual report for you. So as you go through it in the coming weeks, please let me know if you have any questions or you would like additional information on it. Yes, this one right
Just
here.
like that. Great.
Got it.
Fantastic.
Okay, for today, we're going to go through workforce statistics, benefits, compensation, position change requests, and the proposed budget. Based on data as of 12/31/17, the county currently has 118 full-time employees and 25 part-time employees. Constitutional staff make up 75 full-time employees and 10 part-time employees for a total of 228. Separations this past year, there were 21 county employees who left. 15 were full-time and 6 were part-time. Constitutional staff had 7, 5 were full-time and 2 were part-time. The reasons for their leaving: 4 retired, there were 5 involuntary separations, 12 left for other employment opportunities, and 7 were unknown with the constitutional staff. Would like to point out that our turnover rates did decrease this year, or this past year, to 12.3%, dropping from 14.75 in 2016 and 13% in 2015. So I believe this has a lot to do with their salary initiatives, but we have some work to do, because you'll see on the next slide, we are still above our other localities or our other surrounding jurisdictions. They're coming in at 9.8% to 11.2% for their turnover rates. We are strong with our health insurance plans. 90% of our workforce is enrolled. There's 174 employees participating out of 193 benefit eligible employees. This is up from 83% in 2016. Let's look at compensation. Different research firms make their predictions for merit increases for the year. And for 2017, they were all predicting an average of a 3% increase nationwide. It did come in actually at 2.98%, and they are projecting the same amount for 2018 at a 3% merit increase. What does that mean for us locally compared to our surrounding jurisdictions? Goochland for the past 2 years has had a 2% merit increase, which is consistent with Hanover and Chesterfield. We're a little bit better than New Kent. They were at 1.5% this past year, but we're all falling below Henrico. They were at 2.5% this past year. And the county is recommending a 2% merit increase for employees for this year. And this slide just shows their 10-year history of merit increases. As far as competitive compensation goes, as you know, we had a benchmark salary analysis that we completed in 2017. We looked at 6 different jurisdictions, Chesterfield, Hanover, Henrico, Louisa, New Kent, and Powhatan. We're on the 2nd year of this salary adjustment plan. And the county is asking for $121,500 to be budgeted for these benchmark adjustments. In addition, there were staffing change requests made by departments, and Mr. Badesky went through this with you last week during his presentation. There were a total of 23 requests. Out of those 23, the county administration is recommending 14 changes, which I've actually just summarized on the following page since he went through line by line with you last week. They are 9 new positions in public safety, 1 animal protection officer, 3 dispatchers, 5 firefighters. County administration is also recommending increasing hours of the animal shelter attendant and the animal shelter supervisor from part-time to full-time. In addition, the county administration is recommending 1 new recreation coordinator, and this position is partially funded with fees already, and is recommending converting 1 part-time deputy commissioner of revenue 1, which is, for better words for a title, is the DMV clerk, from part-time to full-time, and recommending the elimination of 1 part-time HR specialist and creating a new full-time HR position. So to recap this all, county administration is asking for 10 new full-time positions plus 4 conversions from part-time to full-time, equaling $714,501, a 2% merit increase for employees, equaling $290,000, and the benchmark salary adjustments coming in at $121,500 for a total of just over $1.1 million. In conclusion, our employees are dedicated and committed to service excellence, and the proposed fiscal year 19 budget demonstrates our ability to invest in our workforce and meet increased service demands. And on behalf of our employees, we'd like to thank you for your continued support. I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Questions for Ms. Parrish?
Mr. Chairman. Yep. All right, there we go. All right, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Parrish. So I've got a couple questions. The number of employees compared to population, do we do something like that to see where we are as a general rule?
Haven't in the past, but I'd be happy to.
Okay.
I'll make note of that.
I mean, we're growing, well, the number, and I'm not saying they're not needed probably, but the number of employees, the additional employees that we're requesting this year, what percentage increase is that over the number of employees we have now? Like 10% or 15%?
Probably not even that. I would guess.
It's about 5%. We have almost 200 FTEs, and there's 11 being recommended. Keep in mind, what throws our numbers off is the disproportionate number we've had to add to public safety. So if you would just look at general government, we're not recommending adding many positions. But our public safety needs have outpaced our growth because our volunteers have dropped off in fire and rescue in particular. Right. That's been our driver of our position growth historically. The up-ramping of the dispatchers have added to that position. There's been deferred positions in animal protection. Those are things, and we're expanding the shelter next year. That's the majority of our position increases that are coming up. So percentage-wise, Ms. Lashley, we probably are appearing to grow a little faster than population of growth, around 3%, but most of that's driven on our public safety growth.
Right.
Nine of the 11 positions.
Oh, public safety. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
but I mean, I think Ms. Lascalette, I think she has a point. We can adjust the numbers to make it make sense and apples to apples and all of that. But I think the genesis of the question would be, if you looked over the long pull at inflation plus population growth, you know, on a percentage basis, you know, 2% inflation, 1% population. If you looked at that growth rate over the long pull, what's the growth rate in general government, I guess?
That's where I'm going.
And you could exclude the special nature of the transition of the fire rescue, but if you exclude that, kind of where are we is government growing faster than the underlying population or vice versa?
Right,
So any insight you could give us on that would be very helpful.
Yep.
It's not an emergency need, but it would give us some additional insight to know, particularly in the budget season, whether we're growing appropriately or not.
Right.
Yep. I'd be
that-
happy to get that for you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Anyone else comments?
I have one
Sir.
quick question. Ms. Parrish, how do the benchmark adjustments get made? Is that done by position? I mean, if we allocate this 121,000, how many positions is that impacting?
I can look and give you the exact amount of numbers on that. Typically, right off the top of my head, it's about 30 positions that are impacted. And we do take a look at the positions that are most out of the average of the other surrounding jurisdictions that we polled.
Mr. Chairman, if I can.
Sure.
When we did the benchmark last year, we looked across all departments and did our benchmark study. And we actually benchmarked ourselves 20% below the larger jurisdictions. And when we did that, we identified all the positions throughout the county that were out of that target benchmark number. Last year, the way we actually implemented it over 3 years. Last year, we focused on our lowest paid employees, and we focused on our public safety folks that also had compression issues. They took precedent over any of the other benchmarks last year, and this year, as Ms. Parrish said, we are moving forward with the next section of folks that are most out of the benchmark, and we'll finalize that next year.
So is this dollar amount adequate for bringing all the employees up to that 20% below neighbors, or?
No, sir. There's a third year that would finish to hit that target.
Mr. Chairman, so this does include public safety, county, constitutional officers, but not schools, of course.
Not
Those
schools.
separate,
We took care of most of public safety's benchmarks. There are a few public safety positions that will continue into this year, but we prioritized the funding for public safety last year
Right.
over even our other employees, because we wanted to take care of that. There were certain compression issues that had to have been addressed.
Right.
And so we delayed some of the other benchmarks because we only had a certain amount of funds last year to do some of what we're continuing into this year.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, good. Thank you.
I just had a couple real quick. In this report, it gives us a lot of information, which is good, breakdown. Are the years that are referred to here where it says 2015, or is that calendar year or?
It's calendar year.
It is calendar.
Yeah, moving forward, we're going to be doing a end-year fiscal year report, but these are all calendar year so far.
And they're all calendar year 16, 17?
Calendar year, for instance, if I refer to 2015, it's calendar year 2015.
Yeah, I see the 2015 out to the side or to the bottom of some of these graphs and charts. Are the graphs and charts 2016 then? So you're comparing prior year?
I'm comparing data through 12/31 of 15 for 2015.
And then comparing it to the graph and chart. I guess where I'm going was the graphs and charts, is that calendar 16 then? So you're comparing the prior year?
Correct. Well, the charts and graphs that I've listed are through calendar year, through 12/31 of 17.
Of 17?
Yes.
So where you refer to 2015 off to the side or to the bottom, that's
That's through
2 years prior?
Correct.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. I just want to know what I'm comparing to, that's all. So 2016 doesn't appear anywhere here. It's really, here's your last calendar year, your prior calendar year, 2017, and then here's 2015 for a comparison.
There is some data in there for 2016, yes.
Oh, okay, where it's labeled 2016, then and they're all calendar years.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I just need to know what I'm looking at, that's all. It's really, the other thing, you mentioned the turnover rate dropping quite a bit, and some of these other numbers in the graphs and charts. As part of the strategic plan, we've kind of developed, I won't say benchmarks, because benchmarks is different. You've used a benchmark study but certain targets, if you will, or whatever internal targets that we have to hit. Do we have I didn't see where we've listed out, here's our target, here's where we'd like to be for some of these numbers and graphs and charts. Is there anything you can share with us on that, either in the turnover or some of the other
We'd love to be
breakdowns?
below 10%. So
Okay.
10% is our current goal.
It is our
Hopefully we
current
could
goal.
go lower than that, yes.
Okay, because it's helpful for me to know where we are, but then also where we're trying to get to.
Exactly.
So the goal for the turnover would be 10% or less, which would be at least competitive with our surrounding jurisdictions.
Correct.
Okay.
One more.
Yep, sure, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 5 of this report that we just got handed, at the bottom, it's separations by department. Is the treasurer not part of this, treasurer's office?
They should be, yes, everyone was included. Because 7 out of the 28 are constitutional employees.
I just didn't see him.
Did they have
Did
separations
they not have any
last year?
separation?
They had separations as of January 1.
But not during 2017?
Right.
That may
I think
explain
the
why
one you're
they're
talking
not
about was
listed.
January 1, 2018.
So you're saying in the calendar year 2017, there were none?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Or they weren't processed until after January 1.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on workforce? Okay, seeing none, I appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
This is very helpful, by the way, so thank you for
Thank
preparing
you.
it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, while Barbara comes up to the podium, I do want to thank Kelly. This is the first time we've really generated an annual HR report of this nature. There's always opportunities for improvement, but we have not collected this much data. And your question on the targets, I think that's something that we haven't really established consistently over time. We're trying to do that throughout all of our departments. So as you see these reports in the future, you'll see more of that and have more comparative data
Very helpful.
to be informed by.
Great. So thank you very much, and this will evolve over time, but thank you very much for putting this forward. Barbara, would you like to walk us through?
Sure. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Barbara Horlacher, Director of Financial Services. My first topic today is general fund revenue budget for FY19. The slide shows you, of course, our largest revenues, and it's no news to anybody that real estate taxes are, of course, our largest, followed by other property taxes, which is in general the car tax. And then our third source is state and federal, which might be a surprise, except when you think about the fact that we do get the annual PPTRA amount each year, which is about $2.5 million. And then there's the state support of constitutional officers that makes up most of that. Because we rely so much on real estate, we look carefully at the taxable assessed values. And these numbers, this chart is straight from Mary Ann's presentation, the assessor's presentation, I guess I should say. And so we see that we're getting, over the last 4 years, some nice steady growth in our taxable assessed values. And we're also getting some new growth, new construction, and this chart shows the same chart that was shown in the assessor's presentation. And so correspondingly are our real estate tax revenues, which we see are peaking, I guess you could say, or we're estimated to peak at in 2019 with a budget of $24.8 million. The next slide is our personal property tax revenues, and we're seeing nice growth in that also. Of course, the 2.85 from the state stays the same and will stay the same. And then we are getting higher values in property taxes also.
Barbara, just
Yes.
one comment. Can you go back to that slide real quick?
Yeah, I have a question on that.
I think it's important to point out, while we do see new growth in our personal property tax revenues, The 2.85 is static. So as new residents come in and more vehicles come in, the amount of money that we have to spread for the tax relief for folks, that doesn't go up. So
Correct.
in fact, the portion of tax relief may actually appear lower to someone next year as we have more people and more vehicles. So that we're not getting more funds to offset what has been the historical tax relief. We are seeing, and this is indicative, there is some growth in additional vehicles in here. Some follows our population, but it's consistent with what we're seeing on investment in new vehicles. You can see really the period of time where people weren't buying new vehicles back in 9, 10, 11, you start to see that trend of new vehicles, both on number and in value.
Sales tax, seeing a little bit of variability, but gradually coming up in that area. Business license, same thing, some variability, but gradual increase over the last 5 or so years. Building permit revenues has been a strong source of revenues for us. Last year was 1.18, of course, our highest year, and we have budgeted $850,000 this year, and then $1 million next year. This is kind of summing up where we think we're going to be this year, and compared to next year, and compared to last year. Right now, we're budgeting real estate at the budget. We're forecasting it, and of course, we have our property tax relief. Our 55% revenue sharing. Personal property tax, that includes the state portion. And we're doing well on delinquent, but again, don't want to over budget on that, because after a while you've collected all you can. Local sales and use tax, and business licenses and building permits. Those are our highest revenues right there. And so, are there any questions on revenues?
Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
can you explain, you said we're doing well on delinquent. What are these numbers is what we're going to collect from delinquent accounts?
Correct.
Okay.
And the treasurer's office has been doing a fantastic job of collecting, but you can't count on that being a large source every year, because
Right.
we're
Well,
getting
hopefully there's none.
caught up. Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments, questions? Ms. Hollaker, if we could go back to page 3 real quick.
Mm-hmm.
This shows total taxable assessed values. I assume that's real estate?
Yes.
So it's just real estate.
Yes.
So we are now finally getting back to where we were 9 years ago in 09.
2009.
And the rate at which we taxed real estate was fixed this entire time at 53 cents.
Right. And
So
now you're
we're-
going to ask me why.
Yes, I was going to. That number is higher.
Yes. Well,
It's reading my mind.
there's
That's
two
great.
things happening. One,
Okay.
we're comparing it to actual, which would be everything that's been collected. So we are collecting we are collecting more, I think, than we were in the past. And the other is you have to remember the nature of our fiscal year and our calendar year. So our assessments in the 2009 period were going down, and half the year was on one and half the
Okay.
year was on the
Okay.
next, where the assessments were lower. Now we're in the opposite situation where assessments are going up, so half a year is on a higher assessment.
Sure, I understand. Okay, so it's that phase shift of 6 months of revenue.
Right.
So they're not comparable time periods. One's calendar, one's fiscal.
In a sense, yeah.
So it's not apples to
Because
apples.
you have
Okay.
2 assessments in each fiscal year.
Okay. The last piece of that was, I come back to, again, a similar point to what Ms. Lascalette mentioned. If we took the 09 and grew it by inflation for the last 9 years, which has been very modest, 1%, 2%.
Where would we be?
Yeah, so on a real basis, are we still collecting
Are we ahead of where, because
less
we
than
had
we were
those?
9 years ago.
Yeah.
And yet we've had a lot of growth in population as well. So if you
Right.
adjusted for inflation and population growth,
Yeah.
the taxes that we're actually collecting now has there been a negative real growth
Right.
in
I mean, that's a good
tax
question. I can
collections?
try to
It may be more theoretical than just like,
zero it out, so to speak, or.
yeah, just see where we stand, that's all, because I do know that we're required to advertise that the revenue neutral rate would be.
Correct.
And if we took it from '09 and said, with inflation and population, what would be the revenue neutral rate that we'd have to charge today? And it
Right.
still could be higher than where it is now. So
Yeah,
anyway, just a thought.
I will look into that.
It's more of an interesting exercise than it is a decision-making tool, but other thoughts or?
Well, if we're stopping to ask questions, back on the first page of your presentation was the general fund revenue, showing 47% is from real property taxes. How is that, that includes commercial and residential,
Correct.
right? So, are these numbers shifting over time? Are kind of the, I'm looking at the relationships. You know, are these shifting over time, or?
You mean, is it getting to be a bigger, smaller percentage?
Right, I mean, how does this compare to?
Compared to another year?
Yeah, to a couple
Real
past-
property is pretty steady, I
Right.
would believe, at 40, about half of our income. Probably other property is probably growing a little, but I can go back and look at some of that and see.
Right.
I would assume state and federal is probably pretty constant, because really, like I said, the only money is PPTRA and constitutional support. So
Right.
that's about all we get in state and federal. And so that would be and something to look at is what's our mix been over
Right, that's the word.
historically.
I think we had seen Mr. Ryan's presentation, and some of that's projected on building permits. But we are seeing our commercial base grow to a higher percentage over time. That's, I mean, that's a big number to shift. But we are seeing a better balance on our total service demands, and commercials picking up a higher percentage today than they were 5 years ago.
Right.
So we
but
can certainly get those numbers as well.
you're not going to see that in these kind of figures, though, because we just collect property taxes in general. We don't break it out between residential
I'm just trying to get a sense of relationships and how it looks over time. Just to get a sense of where our revenue comes from. Do we send money to the state?
Do we send money to the state?
Yeah.
If the only that I'm aware of is the money we collect on behalf of the state for state income taxes.
Okay.
I don't know if you're thinking of maybe when there were a couple years there where the state was making you pay back some of the money they gave. I
Oh,
forget
yeah,
what they called it.
Local aid to the state.
Yeah,
Right,
that's
right.
where he was going. Okay.
But that's gone away, fortunately.
Okay.
Does, Ms. Olacker, does the state and federal there that, first of all, the state and federal at 10 or 11% is a fairly small slice, so we're not heavily dependent on outside government sources that tend to be volatile. But does that include the state, the school subsidy? Is that in that 11%?
No, this is just our general fund.
Just the general fund for the
Right.
county
So it's
side.
2.8 from the state for the PPTRA, and then it's support of the constitutional officers. We get very little federal money,
Right.
Compared to
probably not even 100,000 a year.
So if they have trouble with their budget process, there's not a outsized
The federal
impact on us.
process would
Yeah.
not affect us. It would affect schools a lot more,
Sure.
but it would not affect us.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have something? Or?
And that's really probably the most important piece of this. I know it's a small percentage. The smaller, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Just where are we going over time, and are we less or more dependent on outside of our locality? That is one of the
Right.
questions. Thank you.
Okay.
That's it? Okay, I think go ahead and proceed. I guess pick up where we left off.
Yeah,
Right.
sorry.
Well,
okay.
I'll go on to the next one.
Good.
Debt and Again, we're going to focus on this one on the general fund, and we'll talk a little more about the TCSD in the utility presentation. But currently, the general fund carries very little debt. We have 2 school outstanding issues, and then the lease revenue bond that was taken out to complete the emergency communication center. Debt service, we're all pretty familiar with what that is right now. So this is a graph of our existing debt service. It's pretty much peaking now, and then we'll start to go down as we pay off those school pieces of debt. We have certain policies that govern how much debt we can have. The ratio of debt service expenditures to total general fund expenditures should not exceed 12%. And that is about our debt service. How much can we afford to spend on debt and then have money left over for all the services. The other policy is more about our debt capacity. That's our net debt as a percentage of market value of taxable property should not exceed 2.75%. So what is planned for the future? And in the CIP, we'll talk a little bit about this, but in the 5-year CIP, which is the only years that we balanced, we have a new school facility, 20.5, a new circuit court building, 23.5, a new fire station of 5.15, and a Goochland High School renovations, expansion, whatever you want to call it, at $3.5 million. So how are we going to do this? If you see there, the existing debt service is the green, and then imposed on top of it is the new debt service for that $53 million. The plan, and this is a little bit busy, but the plan is the red line is our debt service budget every year. So right now we're at about 3.5, I believe. The plan is to continue to ramp up that budget to reach about 3.9, which it will in 2021 at $100,000 a year if we keep increasing it to 3.9. We think our budget and the tax rate we have currently can support a 3.9 debt service. So you see that there's some blanks below it because in some of those years we're not going to have 3.9 in debt service. So the idea is we budget 3.9, we only spend 3.5, we set aside 400. Or when some of that school debt goes away, we only spend 1.8, we set aside and reserve the rest. So the green line is how that reserve looks, and you see that it's building up to its peak will be over $5 million. And then going out in the out years with that, you see that we can manage to keep it at 3.9, and we can use that reserve until I think 2033 it looks about, when that essentially goes away and enough of our debt has gone away that we've maintained that 3.9 amount. And how would that 3.9 look and compared to our general government expenditures? And again, you're making assumptions about how fast things are going to grow and that kind of thing. But based on a 1.87% growth in general fund expenditures, we would be well within our policy of 12% and then also well within our policy of taxable assessed value. And that would get us those projects for that first 5 years, and that would get us that, I think it was a total of $53 million in debt and the funds to service it. So that is the debt presentation. That's our plan. Questions?
Can I add just one thing? We
Yes.
spent a fair amount of time talking about the capital plans. Potential future borrowings is what they are in the plan to cover them. There is no debt issuance in the annual budget that you're being asked to. In fact, it will be the
2023, I think it's planned.
Several years out before we're even asked to do issuances, and at that time, we'll consider the debt mechanisms. Most likely opportunity at that point would be general obligation bonds that require us to have referendum. That also allows us to leverage our AAA rating for the best possible rates at the time. And so there, wanted to share with you, because again, we shared this with you in context with the 25-year CIP. Part of your annual presentation will be to readopt the 25-year CIP with a 5-year balance and current year, next fiscal year actual appropriation. But I wanted to make sure that this continues to be part of our dialogue and thought process on this as we move forward. And again, for our residents' benefit, this has been balanced at current tax rate with certain assumptions. I think that anytime you talk about debt, our community gets anxious and those kinds of things, and that's respectful. This plan is trying to prioritize the community, the identified needs, with the limited burden on our residents, or with no increased burden on our residents. That does not mean that you will not hear other additional needs from schools, and we worked with them in the plan, so there are needs beyond that 5-year that aren't accounted for here. But again, to bring it to you balanced, we had to put some parameters on this recommendation.
Right.
Questions or comments on the debt policies?
Good.
So that presentation assumed the first 5 years of the CIP is fully implemented, and this would be the sources to pay for the first 5 years, and there's no changes in the tax rate. And any kind of significant borrowing like is contemplated here would have to be through a referendum where the citizens would vote on it.
Correct.
Okay?
We sort of, and you'll hear it again when we get into the CIP presentation, but the other thing I think worthy of pointing out is we're making conscious investments by using cash to offset some of the major projects, and some of them we're investing over $500,000 annually to build up some cash funds, so it's not all debt, and we are building that cash reserve. So there's some intentionality about the planning of how we're to offset that burden as well.
Good. So it'd be a combination of cash and debt. Okay. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none. Next up is judicial administration.
Okay. Then I get a break for a little while. We're going to go over the judicial administration departments today. We are going to start with the circuit court, which handles all civil cases of more than $25,000, has concurrent authority with the general district court for the $4,500 to $25,000, handles divorces, property disputes, adoptions, name changes, and civil appeals, and disputes concerning wills and estates, and all felony cases and misdemeanor traffic and appeals from the general district court and the juvenile court. There's not a lot of change in this, a small increase in professional services because we share the judge's secretary, the cost of the judge's secretary and the secretary. The clerk of the circuit court, the primary functions of the clerk of the court are the clerk of the court, the probate official, the recorder of deeds, and the county clerk. Not a lot of change here either. There is a slight increase in the personnel, and that's personnel and benefits. So that means that someone switched from one benefit package to another, and no change in personnel. The Commonwealth Attorney's Office, their primary responsibility is for prosecuting criminal cases in the circuit court, the general district court, and the juvenile and domestic relations court, appellate proceedings in the Virginia Supreme Court and the Virginia Court of Appeals, and they also do victim witness advocacy. Their budget's actually gone down a little bit in two areas. They plan to have savings in operating costs, some things they're doing more efficiently there, and the personnel is also a change in benefits. Personnel overall staying the same. General District Court is all criminal, traffic, and civil cases, and all preliminary hearings on felony cases. Their budget is very flat also, a little more in contract services, I believe. Higher court-appointed attorney fees. And the big CIP project, of course, is planned for 2023, which we just mentioned in the debt presentation, and there'll be more details to come on that. Some of the future outlooks, the facility issues, of course, which the new courthouse would address, lack of space, but especially lack of or difficulty with security. And the Commonwealth Attorney asked me to add something also, that they are seeing increased complexity, complying with the legal, ethical, and technological aspects of body-worn camera videos. So this is, he's very proud of his office, though. They run things very efficiently there, and they're able to handle them now, but that may not be the case depending on how the General Assembly treats all this going forward. And I believe Commonwealth Attorney is here if you have any direct questions for him, and the clerk of the court is also here.
Okay. That concludes the judicial administration portion.
Yes, it is.
Is there, are there questions from Ms. Horlacher?
Yes,
Susan?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for this. So on the Commonwealth's attorney, they're not changing the number of employees, but they're lowering the cost. How are they doing that?
It could either be a lowering of benefits, like somebody went to a different lower health plan, or it could be turnover of staff. So I would have to go back and look. But sometimes when you replace staff, you replace them at a lower.
Okay.
You have questions?
Yep.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Horlacher, you mentioned a point that I read about in the paper recently about the cameras, and I think Chesterfield's Commonwealth Attorney is not going to prosecute.
I think Mr. Caudell can
Is it
address that.
big of an issue yet, or?
No, and thank you for that. We have with our staff and what we utilize with the Sheriff's Department, oh, by the way, Mike Caudell, Commonwealth Attorney, Goochland County.
Okay.
We have implemented an efficient and effective way to take what the Sheriff's Department has, state police as well, and make sure that we are in compliance with everything that needs to be done. Chesterfield is a little bit different. Mr. Davenport has elected to not prosecute any misdemeanors in the district courts because of the fact that he cannot get funding for staff for his office. We are not there. The General Assembly, I think this session had a bill before it which would require local jurisdictions to provide Commonwealth's attorneys with money for a new assistant or assistants. I don't know how far that's gone, but we do not see that in the foreseeable future here. We're keeping up with what we need to do and keeping ourselves out of trouble. And as far as the personnel change, we did have a retirement, and their replacement was not at the level of the retired individual.
Gotcha. Yep. That makes sense. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Just, while we wrap up this section, I saw Ms. Agnew come in. I wanted to thank her and her staff for all your support in the budget process. Certainly run a very efficient and professional shop as well. So thank you for all you guys do.
Great. Alrighty, that's judicial administration. Next item is utilities and TCSD. Mr. Kidoff, would you like to come forward?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Badesky, I'm Todd Kilduff, Deputy County Administrator for Public Utilities and Community Development. And we have our presentation for our FY19 departmental budget, rate changes, proposed rate changes, and then the Tuckahoe Creek Service District numbers for you. So some of our primary functions in public utilities is to provide the highest quality water and wastewater services to our customers. We operate and maintain all public utility assets. We have about 140 miles of pipe, which laid end to end would stretch from here to Baltimore. Just to put it in perspective, there's a lot of infrastructure that we maintain. We have 7 sanitary sewer pump stations, 2 water booster pump stations, and 3 water tanks. We used to have 4 water tanks. We decommissioned one a few years ago as a result of our utility master plan. And we strive to be transparent in all department actions. Our agency goals, the first one is to set the industry standard for safety, technology, and industry knowledge. We have aligned those as best we could with the county strategic goals, which is why you see SG there. That's SG, so strategic goal 1, 4, and 5 is what that matches closest to. And we're very proud of our safety and technology use. And I don't really think about it too much until I meet with other localities and other public utility departments and the Virginia Rural Water Association, which I'm on the board for, and they ask questions about who's doing what with what. Who's using GIS and how you're using GIS? Who's using Miss Utility tickets and how are you doing that? And I tell them what we're using, and most everyone writes down what we're doing. And you know, it's kind of nice to be the tip of the spear on a lot of these things. We address all emergencies in an expeditious manner and professional manner, which aligns with county goals 1 and 4. And we identify and address any relevant projects identified in the 2015 Utility Master Plan, which we have done since we presented it to you. We do have performance measures. There's several more we could probably add up there if we wanted to, but the high ones are responding to any emergencies within 24 hours. I can't think of any emergency, and we do track this, any emergency that's taken us more than just a few hours to get to. And it usually depends on how we're told. If it's a SCADA alert, which is just a fancy way of saying we got a program on our phones that wakes us up at midnight if a pump goes out or there's an overflow or something, we obviously respond to that immediately because it's a direct line. Some other emergencies come to us through the dispatch. At night on the weekend, somebody might call our hotline and they get directed to dispatch, who then notifies us. And sometimes our best eyes and ears in the field is our customers. You know, even if we don't get a dispatch call or something happens on our phones that we need to respond to, somebody may just call us, you know, the next morning. They say, hey, I heard something in my backyard, or I see water coming out of the ground, and we respond immediately. The next item is shop drawings. It's something that's not talked about very often, but it is important to the construction industry. And just because a set of plans says you have to install a 12-inch PVC pipe, well, there's a lot of different manufacturers of PVC pipe. So the shop drawings are really the contractor's way, either our own contractor or a developer's contractor. They send us what they plan on actually installing, down to the name brand, down to the size, down to the nuts and bolts of everything. And our goal is to get all that reviewed and back to them. And it could be a massive package. It could be 50 sheets back to the contractor within a 2-week span. And we haven't had any issues hitting that mark. We also provide all construction inspections for utilities that are installed within 2 days of a request, and we haven't had any issues there either. When it comes to our budget, there's just a few minor changes. The overall total expenditures, as you see, is just a change of about a little over $7,000. But the personnel changes really has to do with promotions and new positions. I held the Director of Public Utilities title until just a few months ago, where we promoted Matt Longshore to that position, and we created a new position when he was the utility engineer, if you can follow me on this, the utility engineer to the Assistant Director of Public Utilities position, and we have just backfilled that position with an individual from Hanover County. So we're very, very proud of that. But that's the increase that you're seeing there. And then for the operating costs, we still have some residual condition assessment items that were identified in the Utility Master Plan that we're still working on. We did all the capital improvement projects. Now we're focused on the condition assessments. It's basically if there's a vault or something that we have that was identified as being rusty, or some concrete that's breaking on a wall in a building or something like that, that's where those condition assessments came in on the master plan. So those are some issues that we're working on. And we also know that Henrico County, who we buy water from and send wastewater back, their rates increase, and that's all covered in the operational costs. The capital side, the FY19 request, if you see there in column 3, the $2.4 million, that's what we've identified for through a feasibility study that Timmons Group did for the Hickory Haven Samory Forest sewer line project. Whether the project moves forward or not is still in limbo. We have sent a survey to the neighborhood saying, just basically requesting who's interested in the project and who isn't. But regardless of how it shakes out, we still wanted to make sure we are prepared on our end financially to make sure that that's there. So that's why you see that $2.4 million. And that's just for the installation. I know Mr. Minnick and Mr. Peterson, you were at the community meeting, but we explained to the neighborhood that this is really just the installation of the mainline infrastructure up until the property line. We install a clean out at that point. That's our point of demarcation. And then the onus is on the homeowner at that point to take it from that point to their house, wherever that may be, in the front yard, the backyard. Mostly covered this, but really the personnel changes are listed there, some more operational increases. The first bullet point for operation is interesting. When I started with the county, we were seeing just a lot of houses being built. So those are smaller meters. They're our 5/8" meters, are the smallest we have. But we've just seen a large uptick in our large meters, which unfortunately just cost a lot more money than the little 5/8" meters. The largest meter we had to date was with the retreat at West Creek, the apartment complex on Wiltshire Parkway. That was an 8". That was our largest one ever, and we were very excited about that. But now that Bristol's here and Sheltering Arms is underway, these are some other large meters that we actually purchased. We don't have the developers do that. That's actually part of our budget and how we handle those projects. But it's an interesting one to see that we're getting a lot more requests for these larger meters that we haven't had before. It's just been in the past year and a half. As mentioned, Hickory Haven is the capital project there. One major development, one large undertaking, which you'll see here in just a few minutes, is a rate study. We actually, I'd say probably around this time last year, started discussing doing an actual full-blown rate study on how our budget is handled, where capital improvement projects would lie, where R&R would lie. And R&R is just a fancy way of saying removal and replacement of pipe. All pipe and infrastructure has an industry standard of useful life. Pipe is around 50 years. So the theory being that in 50 years after you install that pipe, you have to take it back out and replace it with something else. And that's not necessarily the full story. There's so much great trenchless technology out there. So any sewer pipes, we may not actually have to remove and replace. We can actually slip line with a fancy product called cured in place pipe. There's a lot of different ways to not have to tear up people's yards, which we would venture on first. But the reality is we do have infrastructure on the ground, and eventually one day it will need some attention. So that's really what the R&R side is for, and the rate study does identify that. Some future outlook and challenges. We are going to continue to monitor our system for water pressures and water quality. The water pressure used to be a very big issue for us. And then once the utility master plan was completed, it identified what we needed to do, and we actually value engineered some of the items that were in the utility master plans to make them even cheaper as we went to construct. And I'm happy to say that some of the people who called us and said they have trouble even taking a shower because the water pressure was so low, they actually called us and said, I don't know what you did, but keep doing it. And the good news is we are going to keep doing it because the things that we had adjusted are really sort of set it and forget it items. As I mentioned earlier, the fourth water tank. The fourth water tank that we decommissioned, that was a huge issue for us. Well, we're not going to turn that tank back online. So really, we're good to go, and we received kudos from a lot of the citizens. So we're happy about that. And the water quality, we're always working on that. We're always flushing water out of fire hydrants to get the older, aged water out and the younger, fresher water in from Henrico. We actually installed a chloramine booster station, which was completed about a year ago, year and a half maybe. I'm getting my time frames a little mixed up, but it's been in service for a while, and we've already seen a positive outcome from that. We used to have parts per million of chlorine just of about 1, and just to put that in perspective, the most you can have is 4. So when it's at 1 at our border, we're really under the gun to get it to the citizens before it gets down to 0.2, which can happen pretty quick in the summertime when the heat exacerbates things. We've been able to boost it up to 2, 2.5, 3. So we've seen a very positive outcome of that. And the big thing really is growth. The more these pipes are big because they're installed for the full development of the Tuckahoe Creek Service District, and we just don't. It's not fully built out yet. So the more users we have, the more houses, the more commercial businesses, the better for the water quality. And the other item is just managing a system that's growing. I mean, we've grown about 9% per year. It's just amazing to see it all happen, and we've been able to manage it pretty well. I want to thank you for the positions we've requested and been funded for over the past few years. It's helped us stay on top of the growth. So as mentioned earlier, we contracted with Draper Aiden. Cheryl Stevens is here with Draper Aiden. She actually did a rate study for us. I wish we could have done something in-house. We just don't have the time or the expertise, and she definitely does, I can tell you that. She knows everything about how to do rate studies. She's been doing them for a number of years, and I'm very happy to have her here and have her complete our rate study for us. It was a big undertaking. It took a lot of my time and Barbara's time and several others to pull this all together and make sure we had something cohesive for you. And I'm going to pass the baton over to her for a second so she can give you her presentation on the rate study. You can just press to the right.
Good afternoon. I'm Cheryl Stevens with Draper Aiden. As Todd had mentioned, we've worked on the rate study over the past 6 months or so. And the real purpose of the study was, one, to look carefully at your future water and sewer expenses and to make pretty reasonable projections about how the future would unfold as far as purchasing water, purchasing sewer treatment, and your other costs. We wanted to look at the proposed capital projects and to establish and fund this renewal and replacement fund, which, you know, there's a lot of math kind of behind the scenes, but we looked at the value of all the assets, their useful life, and said, as these things near their useful life, how much money would you need to have on hand to repair or replace those items? And then just to take a 5-year look at the rates and say what kind of rate increases might you need over the next 5 years. A couple of the key goals that we had. One, we wanted to generate enough water revenue to pay for water expenses and sewer revenue to pay for sewer expenses, which is a little bit of departure from maybe a 4% increase on both water and sewer every year, regardless of the underlying expenses of the two funds. We looked at pretty reasonable and conservative projections of what kind of growth might be incurred over the next few years. And then we also added increases in your big costs, purchasing water, purchasing wastewater. We looked at the connection fees and did something a little different than what you're currently doing. Your connection fees really kind of subsidize your operating expenses today. And ideally, communities should take those connection fees and set them aside to fund capital or to fund debt service on future projects or current debt service. So, and you know, the magnitude of this, like in FY19, your connection fees could be more than $3 million. So moving those out of your operating revenues has an impact on this budget. And for the renewal and replacement fund, our goal, based on the value of the assets that you own, is to put away $1 million per year for water and 1.7 for sewer. So again, those are large numbers that impacted our initial calculations. So to do all of those things, we saw very large increases in both water and sewer, and increases that we knew the citizens and the board would not be able to manage. So we backed down on some of our projections, particularly how to use those connection fees and also how much of the renewal and replacement fund to fund each year, with the goal of keeping your water and sewer rate increases to 5% and 6% per year. So in order to do that, I told you we had the goal of putting about $1 million away for the replacement fund every year. We backed that way down to a few $100,000 each year. But out at FY23, we were able to eventually get up to a little over $1 million. On the sewer fund, the goal was 1.7. We backed that way down to a few $100,000, then maybe 700, and then maybe 900. We never even got to 1.7 in our 5-year projection period. And on the sewer fund, we found that we could not transfer all of the connection fees to the capital fund because it would increase the rates too much. So for the first few years, we only transferred 75% of those fees. All of that just to maintain rate increases that were more acceptable. This page has a lot of numbers on it, but the key things I wanted you to just realize is that this just projects increased revenues every year based on reasonable growth projections. We move the connection fees or some portion of them to the capital fund every year. We've put in reasonable increases for your operating expenses. And every year after moving the connection fees and putting at least a few $100,000 in the renewal and replacement fund, there's a small net revenue each year. And as you'll see, that renewal and replacement fund grows to almost $4 million over this 5-year period. And we looked at all of the capital projects in your recently revised capital fund, and moving those connection fees allows you to pay debt service and all of those capital projects over the short term. That's on the water side. And the sewer side's very similar, 6% increases. As I said, we didn't move all the connection fees to the capital fund, I think 75%. But over time, we're able to fund all of those capital projects that you have in the short term over 5 years. You accrue about $1 million in your capital fund as a balance at the end of that 5-year period. And we end up with about $3 million in the renewal and replacement fund over that 5-year period, even though we're funding it at levels that were less than we had hoped for. So those 5% and 6% water and sewer increases will allow you to fund those projected operating expenses, pay your existing debt, pay for about $12 million in capital funds between the water and sewer funds over 5 years, establish some reserves for capital and also some reserves for the renewal and replacement projects.
So just to supplement that, thank you, Cheryl. Just to reiterate, it would be a 5% on the water side and 6% on the sewer side. So what does that mean for our customers? What does that look like? This little graph here, if you look at the far right side, we actually have a minimum charge. It's for 4,000 gallons. So anyone who uses, it's no less than that. We basically start at the 4,000 gallon mark, which includes our service fee, and then move from there incrementally per 1,000 gallons of usage as a rate. So what you'd see on a 4,000 gallon bill is about a $1.70 increase for water, about $3.50 for sewer, totaling about $5.20. So really this year you're seeing on the minimum bill $92.66, which is at the very bottom there. If this is approved, your minimum bill would be $97.86, and that's bi-monthly. The next steps for this would be a public hearing on the user rates, which would be April 3rd. And then it would be adopted on April 17th. And again, if approved, the rates would go into effect July 1st. So any questions before we roll into the Tucker Creek Service District? Any questions on the rates or the utility budget? I might need you back up here.
Sure. Questions, Ms. Lasquette?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so Mr. Kilduff,
Yes.
I see what we're trying to do with the connection fees and move them to the fund, so that makes a lot of sense. So the 5 years, I think we're estimating something like 12 million going towards the CIP identified needs and the 5-year CIP, right? So my question is, how does that match with the utility master plan? So that all dovetails with the utility master plan, is that right? And
Yes,
that's
as a
how you
matter
built the CIP, right?
Great question. Yes, and you're absolutely right.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, in the 25-year CIP that was presented back in December, we had all those projects. Thankfully, we had the utility master plan readily available that we could pull all the projects out there. It had costs associated with them, and that's what we used. With some minor adjustments based on that meeting, we worked them into this model.
Right.
So, yeah, great question.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Minnick?
Yeah, thanks. So part of this, so we buy our water from Henrico and sewer service from both Henrico and Richmond.
That's right.
So how are the rate increases they pass on to us calculated?
Yeah, it's usually around this time of year that they'll actually send out an email. I haven't received one yet from them on this year's or what they're proposing, but that is fully coordinated with the utilities directors. Usually it's Hanover, Henrico, Richmond, Chesterfield, us, Powhatan, and I think that might be it. But what we do is we look at those numbers when they come in and see how they align up with what we're proposing. And I can tell you that they're pretty consistent. Everyone's been pretty consistent across the board. I want to say Henrico has been consistently around the 5% mark. I think Powhatan is typically a little bit lower than that, but everyone's usually around the 5% mark. And we have benchmarked that in the past. And I'm more than happy to pull that information together after this and make sure it's in one document to look at if you want.
Okay, so the 5% rate increase from Henrico for water is for all the localities around the area that are obviously buying water from them. So that 5% rate increase is just kind of covered in the 5% increase that we're proposing now.
Detailed projections,
Yeah.
we made assumptions about what the increase in cost.
Could you come to the microphone, please?
I'm
Thank
sorry. In our detailed projections, we looked at some of the historical rate increases from Henrico for water, for sewer, from the city for sewer. And then I guess there's DOC water and sewer, which are much, much smaller numbers, and program those into these increases. So those 5 and 6 cover costs plus your personnel,
Right.
operations, et cetera. Yes, sir.
So I'm still a little confused on that.
Now I'm
If we-
confused.
We buy all of our water, and that cost of buying the water goes up 5%. The proposal is for a 5% water increase to our customers. It doesn't seem like it would help us accomplish some of the other objectives of the removal of the one-time. Is that
It's not apples to apples on that.
okay?
Well, maybe
That's
this
the
answers the question. I hope it does, but let me know if it doesn't.
Okay.
What we're charging our customers, if I could go back to that slide, is about $5.92. That's not what we're being charged, if that makes sense. Henrico is, I can't remember off the top of my head, $3, I'm just going to say, somewhere around there. So their 5% would be on that to us, not to what their own customers would pay in their
Okay.
county. So that, does that?
I think from what I'm hearing, the cost of buying the water is not our only expense.
That's correct.
So when we talk about a 5% increase, it's on all of our expenses, not just the cost of water. Is that?
Many of the other expenses were.
You can just,
I will. Many of the other expenses, we aren't projecting 5% increases on. So your whole budget, I don't remember the percentage of it, is like the purchase of water. But some items are increasing at less than 5%, some at 5%, a couple maybe a little more than 5%. So we looked at the overall package of expenses and compared the rates to it.
So is it true to say that in the aggregate, all of the non-water expense is growing at less than 5%? That wasn't meant to be a trick question. I just see.
I would say
'Cause if-
probably, I'm thinking we put 1.5% and 2% on many of your increases.
Okay, so then there's the answer then. That delta would help buy us some of the other things we're trying to accomplish.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't want to add to confusion, but just for clarity, it's not, and we've said in the past, part of the reason our rates are going up is because Henrico charges us more.
Mm-hmm.
That is accurate to a point. The rate increase is made up of our expense side of that. It's made up of the R&R programs. It's made up of our operational costs. It's made up of how we're handling our capital. So there's a number of different ways that ultimately gets to these rate increases for us, and it's built on a plan that's consistent with the capital improvements that you wanted to adopt for the system. Mm-hmm. And so it's not as clear as just Henrico went up. That is a part of an equation, but there's a fair amount of background behind it.
Okay. Good. Mr. Travis, do you have anything? Okay. So I just want to reiterate that I like the idea of not using one-time connection fees to fund recurring operating costs. I like the idea of separating those two out so that the operating costs, the annual operating, are covered by the annual revenues. We get back on a sustainable basis. Also like the idea that if we know a total replacement of the entire system way out in the future is a huge number, that we should start to prepare for that and not kick the can down the road. So I do like those two concepts that we're trying to weave into this, which is fairly new as I understand this, and this model does give us that insight that we perhaps didn't have before about what would happen if we did these things and how fast can we accomplish these objectives without turning over the apple cart. So so thank you for that insight. I appreciate it. And that model gives that to us. So thank you. Any other comments for?
No, good.
Thank you for that presentation.
Thank you very much. I'll pass over to Barbara for the Tucker Creek Service District.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kiloff.
Thank you.
Okay, take a look now at the Tuckahoe Creek Service District. Very first thing we see is the budget for FY19. It's a $6 million budget. About $5 million of it is the actual debt service through the VRA for the Tuckahoe Creek Service District. And $1 million of it is to pay back our obligation to Richmond. So what are our obligations in the TCSD? We have the 2002 and the 2012 VRA debt that is at approximately 91. We expect it'll be at about $91 million at the end of FY18. We have our debt to the City of Richmond for capacity rights for wastewater treatment of $23.5 million, and there's still a loan outstanding to the general fund, which will be $1.6 million at the end of fiscal year 18. We know the sources of revenue for the TCSD are primarily the ad valorem tax and the 55% revenue sharing from the general fund. And we've all seen this chart. It's the difference in the debt service after the refinancing that occurred in 2012. Just like we are, we are seeing increased values in the TCSD, and we see a steady growth up, and we expect that that will allow us to maintain the ad valorem tax rate. We've seen this chart last year where we're at a very close point of the ad valorem and the 55% revenue sharing covering our debt service, and we can see the debt service continuing to rise till it peaks at about 2026. So overall, what's been happening, we've been repaying the general fund loan that was started in FY17, continuing through FY22, and then that will be complete. We've been making payments to Richmond from the utilities operating budget, but that had limited impact on decreasing the liability. So this year we are hoping to make, well, in budget year 19, we are hoping to make a $1 million payment to the City of Richmond. And to do that, we would maintain the ad valorem at 32 cents. Continue the repayment of the general fund loan at $500,000, continue debt retirement, the City of Richmond at a pace of hopefully about $1 million a year. We continue to have cash in the TCSD fund of about $6.6 million. Of course, our reserves that are required of $13 million, and then we have a reserve in the general fund that we have built up as now $1 million. And we will have a public hearing on the TCSD ad valorem rate on April 3rd, along with the other public hearings. And now, questions on the TCSD?
Questions about the TCSD from Ms. Harlacher?
Mr. Chairman, so the fund balance in the Tuckahoe Creek fund,
It's about 6.6 million.
right.
It may be higher, that might be from last year, I'd have to check that, but.
So it's 6.6 million in the fund
Correct.
and 13 million in U.S. Bank.
Right, and essentially that covers the last 2 years of the debt. So even though the debt goes till 2042, 41 and 42 are paid for, so we're required to keep that 13 million in U.S. Bank. We can't touch that.
Yeah, Ms. Loskowitz,
Until
that was in the VRA documents that we're required to set that aside
Right.
until it's paid off.
I remember that.
And effectively, it'd be self-liquidating in the final 2 years to pay off the remaining balance, but that's required by the documents.
Right, and that becomes available when it's paid.
When it's paid, and in the model, I think we've got it self-liquidating the last 2 years, just to take down the last couple of years. But it's not available until after the debt's been satisfied.
And that fund is created to, the financial stability, that's not anything to do with infrastructure, anything, it's the financial stability of the fund, the borrowing.
That was basically one of the levels of collateral
Right.
to sell the bonds into the marketplace, to know that there'd be that level of cash collateral, and that was a requirement from VRA.
Right, so I thought I understood, just want to be sure it's
Sure,
clear.
yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Other questions?
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Minnick? Yep.
The reserve in the general fund for $1 million is that, we've kind of got that set up for any kind of potential downturn, I think, that occurs between now and when we have a kind of that bolus year, or those bolus years of debt service. So is it would we generally just keep this as a general fund and in the general fund and notate it as such of what its specific use for, or do we create some special category for this $1 million that kind of, I mean, I know you can't obligate another board going forward, but, you know, to preserve this line in case it's needed at some point?
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Harlacher, but that pledge or obligation on our part was created around the time of the debt restructuring as part of the package deal, knowing full well that at that time in 2012 that the debt service requirements were going to continue to escalate about $300,000 a year. And none of us know when the timing or magnitude of the next downturn is, but to be able to have that go up $300,000 a year during a downturn would put a bit of a bite on us. And so this was part of if we do the restructuring, this is an extra layer of security, if you will, against some downturn. Now, since 2012, we've had nothing but upturn, so it's been good news, and that's helped earn us back from the edge, the cliff, if you will. And we'll continue to monitor that over time. But to your point, it's been earmarked, if you will, but it's not been restricted in any way to where it can't be used if needed to help out if there's a downturn. So.
But I think to answer your question, I'm not sure here, but it's in what we call a assigned fund balance. So we would have to be directed by another board to say, you know, use it on this or don't use it on that kind of thing. So.
The idea here is to try and make sure that this stays in good shape almost no matter what happens going forward, so that we're not back restructuring again, but that we're continuing to earn our way out, and that if and when we feel some level of comfort in the future that this is good without having to raise the 32 cents or do another restructuring, then we can revisit those things. But so is that, Mr. Badesky, is that fair characterization? Okay. All right, Ms. Harlacher, any other questions for Ms. Harlacher on the TCSD?
Just to follow up, if you don't mind,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman. So that number's kind of staying static. It's just sitting there. We're not adding to it.
The 13 million?
No, the 1 million.
The 1 million? No, we
It's kind of
planned it at
sitting
1
to the
million,
side,
so.
but we're not actively adding to it. It's
No.
our little cushion. Gotcha.
No, in fact, it took us a couple of years to get
Right,
there,
I
so we
definitely
had been
remember
adding
that.
to it to get to that, but once we've gotten to that, then that's pretty much it. So.
Okay,
Good.
excellent. All right.
Maybe I'll add a follow-up to that if you don't mind.
Sure,
Mr.
go right
Chairman.
ahead.
So if we draw down from the million, do we build it back up?
Yeah.
Say we have a couple of weak years, how do we handle it?
Well, there's nothing in writing that says if you draw 100, you'll put in equal amounts for the next 3 years. There's nothing that granular. It was basically a representation or obligation on our part to build it up to $1 million over time and to keep it there over time. So if it does fall down, it'll be on us to build it back up when we see it, as we see appropriate to do so. But there is nothing in writing to require that. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, there is no plan in the next 5 years, assuming all things equal, to utilize that $1 million.
Yeah, I think conceptually, and this is maybe getting ahead of ourselves here, but conceptually, at some point, that debt service requirement will stop going up each year.
Right.
And if we get to that point, and there's sufficient revenues coming in to cover the annual expense, then you've got a whole different level of comfort
In theory.
that you can make those payments going forward. But until then, as long as it is going up and there is a potential of a downturn, it's nice to have that buffer in there to smooth things out a bit and not miss any payments. So. Okay.
Split it.
But I won't ask between who. Any other questions or comments or thoughts on the TCSD? I mean, the good news is the TCSD rate is anticipated to stay at the 32 cents. With under the pre-restructured numbers, it'd be around 50 now and growing to 60 within 2 years. But the good news is we think under the current projections, we should be able to hold the line at 32, which is where it's been for several years now. So, okay.
More than several. More than several has been at 32.
True. Ever since we since we started.
Yeah,
So
going on 7 years.
yeah. Who knows? Maybe. Yeah. That's
pretty
good news. That's the good news. That's the good news.
Pretty good.
That's pretty good.
Anything else on TCSD? If not, we'll go ahead and proceed to the capital improvements program for FY 2019.
Great. We're going to take a fast ride through the CIP here.
Fasten your seatbelts.
So and the reason we're going to go fairly quickly is we've seen all of this. Nothing has really changed since January when you adopted this. The long-term CIP that we presented you then, the year one is FY19. That's what we're going to focus on today, and those are the funds you're going to appropriate when we adopt the budget on April 17th. We did balance the first 5 years, balance meaning stipulated sources of revenue to pay for those projects. But altogether, it is a 25-year plan. And this is just the breakdown of it. You see the largest portion being on transportation because those tend to be large projects. Facilities management, that's the 5-year, but let's focus on the year coming up, FY19. We have our usual $185,000 that we call site improvements. That's done to do medium-sized to small capital projects, replace roofs, sidewalks, things like that. And that is paid for with operating funds. The county vehicle replacement also pays for with operating funds is $80,000 a year. Keep our county vehicles on a cycle of replacement. And next year we're anticipating the Goochland Sports Complex is going to need some replacement of roofs, HVAC equipment, and the gym floor. More life cycle replacements at the library, HVAC equipment and flooring. Life cycle at the administration building, HVAC equipment, and flooring. Central High School, and this is separate from the project at Central High School, there are also some life cycle replacements there, HVAC, flooring, gym floor, and roofing. Also hoping to add in there some parking lot improvements and a playground, irrigation, and trail improvements. Public safety building needs some new HVAC and flooring. And then the administration complex, this is part of the space study results and renovating to address space needs in the, not just in this building, but in the entire complex. Judicial administration, nothing really in 19, but in FY20 we start setting aside cash for a project. For the planning and construction of a new court building. Fire rescue's got a lot of stuff going on next year. I think the chief's probably mentioned several times the need for replacement of high mileage emergency vehicles. I think those have already been taken off. The old ones have already been taken off the road. The replacement of the SCBA equipment is very important, obviously, for the safety of our firefighters. This will be the second year of a hydraulic tool plan. We estimated it would take $500,000 altogether to replace all of the hydraulic tools, and we have started that in FY18, and so this will be the second year. A replacement of an ambulance, replacement of the cardiac monitors and AEDs when they exceed their lifespan. More lifespan items or the firefighting gear, and hoses and nozzles are also needing replacement. We also plan to set aside $500,000 in cash, again, to build up that cash for the eventual construction of a West Creek fire station. Also included is purchase of land, both for a District 2 fire station, which does not exist, and then the replacement of the number 2, Station 2 fire station. Parks and Recreation, not a lot going on there. We do have one more project in FY19 at Hidden Rock Park, which is to improve playing services, renovate the concession stands, and improve other amenities. We figure with lighting those fields there, we'll probably be able to about double the time of usage at those fields. IT is all cyclical replacement, which is also paid by operating funds. So those are your PCs, your servers, and things like that. The sheriff, we've moved the vehicle replacement cycle into the CIP budget. And so we have a flat 386,570 to replace 9 vehicles, I believe. And that is also paid for with operating funds. Transportation, one project in the 5 years, and that's the Fairgrounds Road extension. More details to follow when we know more about the state revenue sharing of this, but that would to be extend from the roundabout to Route 6. Education, they've got quite a few projects going on too. The first year of the set-aside of funds for a new Goochland Elementary School with an early childhood center. And that will be setting aside funds for the next 3 years, and then the main construction in the 4th year. Security enhancements for the current facility. A lot of security, external key access, and telephone system upgrades for all the other schools as well. And an improvement to to do a roof at Randolph. And of course, a bus. The schools is on a replacement cycle for their bus, and this helps keep them in the correct safe mileage range. To pay for this budget, this is the 5 years I was talking about as balanced. Of course, you see the debt in the outer 2 years that we mentioned earlier. The operating funds, we will consistently put in about $800,000 to do the recurring kind of expenses. We have some proffer money being used for roads. Grants and donations is a little bit of everything. It's some state money in there. It's some possible money from sales of land. It's some donation money, and it's also some prior year money from previous projects. And then the bulk of the money for the projects comes from reserves in FY19. In the utilities, we've already discussed this project, which would be the Hickory Haven Sam Marie Forest, and all those funds would come from connection fees.
Can I just add one thing as it relates to the schools projects? I think with everything that's going on in the country right now, the schools are paying extra special attention to security. Their budget includes a substantial amount of investment towards some of the security programs. Ms. Lashlight, you had asked me about some hardening. They're exploring everything. They're meeting with the sheriff's office. So they're going to evaluate and stretch their budgets as far as they can. They're exploring external key locks, the phones, an internal communication system to be able to alert everybody simultaneously. They're exploring all options right now.
That's
and
terrific.
so they're going to utilize the funds they have there to best meet those priorities.
Okay, questions on the CIP? Ms. Lascavette,
All
do you
right,
happen to
Mr.
have any
Chairman.
questions? Okay.
Would you go back to the IT slide, please, for me? We didn't have that. So,
Oops, no, that wasn't it. Yeah, I think it's right before this.
okay. All right, so this is, where are we putting the new IT system? Where's that?
That's, the money's already been appropriated, and.
Okay, so that's not in the, oh,
it's-
good answer.
It's already set aside, actually, so.
Okay, so this is just the routine upgrading?
Most of it is. I mean, you see in FY 20, the building inspections and the community develop is interested in getting some new permitting software. Fiber to the new animal control shelter. We're putting in the pipe, but we'd like to fill it, hopefully, next year. You know, we're going to look at document management, but we're going to see what comes with our new system too. So,
Right.
but mostly just, yes, recurring replacements.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Other questions? Ms. Locker, could you find, I'm not sure which slide was on, went pretty quickly. There's a slide where we talk about reserves of an amount of $5 million being used to fund some of the
Right.
projects.
That was near the end.
Yes, 5.522. That's not unspecified reserves. Those are earmarked reserves for specific
Oh.
uses.
Right. I mean, right now we have money set aside for, yes, it's drawing down on, for instance, the money that was set aside, revenue recovery money. It's money that was set aside for the FY19 and 20 CIP. It's, yes, existing reserves that.
They were earmarked or specified. I mean, maybe you're the right one to ask us to. But so these are not, you know, the general fund reserves, the unspecified reserves.
No, it's not the unassigned fund
It's not
balance.
the
No,
unassigned
no,
fund
no.
balance. So these are all specified for this particular purposes. And I do know, well, I do know. I mean, I've seen, and I guess there's another $3.5 million, so it's a total of $8 million or so. Same comment on the 3.5. So these are all okay. So then the other. These are drawdowns of previously assigned balances, and we're also assigning new cash reserves, setting aside money for each of the new firehouses, the acquisition of land, the new schools. How do those numbers compare? The amounts that we're drawing down from specified reserves, the amounts we're putting into specified reserves. You see where I'm going with this?
Right. How much of that 5.5 are we actually just setting aside?
Well, my
versus-
question is, what's the relative order of magnitude on the two? We're drawing down versus we're setting aside so that our total reserves, what's the impact on our total reserves? Is that may be not something that you have here at your fingertips.
Right. I think I know what you're, just to reiterate, it's not touching the unassigned fund balance. It's just using monies that are formally set aside. And then it depends on how, your year-end results work out, how much of that you replace, essentially.
Sure, exactly, yeah. Because my sense is we're doing the prudent thing here. We're setting aside reserves in the past. We've set aside these reserves. Now we're saying, okay, that purpose has now come before us. Let's go ahead and use those for those. And that we also know that we have large numbers coming up for other uses, and we're setting aside funds for those as well. So and we're not touching the unassigned balance. I think we're doing prudent things all around, but when you see this number of $8 million coming out of reserves in a 2-year period, it may not be immediately obvious that we're doing prudent things all along the way. We're not, emptying the reserve balance, if you will. So I just want to make sure that we address that very upfront, very specifically, to say yes, these were set aside in previous years for these purposes, but we also are setting aside other monies for the future for other purposes, and that we're not touching the unassigned balance. So just want to make that clear.
Okay. I think it's also probably worth mentioning, we probably are drawing at a higher pace than we are pulling from, because we're also, this model assumes year-end balance going straight to cover the projects in a cash format. And so we're not adding back to so we are drawing down onto those reserves, but we're also taking care of utilizing year-end projections. And you can see on this particular chart, it ranges between 3.6 and 3.3 amount of cash that we anticipate from annual savings. Our history and trends show us that we can meet those projections. It's reliant on those funds, so instead of it, those would have been the prior year reserves when we weren't making expenditures. So we're actually putting it directly into cash funding projects in that instance.
Okay, so that'll never end up in assigned balances. That'll just go straight through. Well, I mean, it may be in assigned balance for a short period of time, but the idea is it's being dedicated to cash fund some of these projects.
Correct.
Okay.
It's debt.
Mr. Chairman, if I
sir.
may add to maybe part of Ms. Lascolet's question. So these are reserves that we have for the projects that we talked about today. None of these are reserved for the finance system.
Correct.
That's already off the charts. All input into a
sitting
little
there already. It's in the CIP, right. Okay. That money is set aside.
So this is just for the projects that you just mentioned to us.
The future projects, right. Any projects that are ongoing right now, and that one we do consider ongoing, the funds are already there for.
Very good.
Okay, and federal or state dollars for the extension would show up here as?
It's in the grants and donations, and
the
I
3.4.
think, correct me if I'm wrong, Todd, but we're still waiting to hear on how much revenue sharing money there'll be on the extension.
So,
in that 3.4, it's about 1.9 we've anticipated.
We've
okay,
put that in there, but we're waiting to hear.
Okay, so this, just to point out again, these aren't grants that would have strings attached. These are roundabout extension.
I don't believe there's any grants in this at all.
Good, because we don't want to get dependent on grant money either. So, okay, good. All right, I think we're on the right track, right?
Yep. Mr. Chairman, as this is the last formal topic on today's scheduled agenda, we certainly are here to answer any questions as it relates to the budget as introduced to date. At your next regularly scheduled meeting, we have 4 or 5 additional presentations, which basically closes out our formally scheduled presentations. We have 3 town halls on top of that. We have reserved an additional date if it was needed on the 13th of March. But if there's any questions that we can address today, certainly if we're going to address it in next week's presentations, we can alert you to that. But if there's any outstanding concerns or issues to this point, we're here and willing to talk through any of those, or certainly have opportunities as we move forward.
Okay, with that as a bit of a preamble here, Board, are there any budget-related questions at all to bring before staff so far? As Mr. Badesky mentioned, there will be an opportunity for the citizens to provide input as we go out to the town halls and solicit input before the budget's adopted. And in the past, we've actually changed some things in the budget based on that feedback, and we'll continue to do so, or at least with an open mind. But is there anything at this point so far on what we've heard for staff or? I'm just going to say that staff's done a fantastic job. I mean, given the task at hand, not raising any the tax rates on the TCSD or the real estate, and putting together a budget that does play some catch-up ball on our investment in county assets and resources, including vehicle replacements for sheriff and vehicle replacements for the schools, and does fund all the major priorities, and it helps increase funding for positions for public safety where they're needed. And I think staff's done a fantastic job so far. So I just want to thank you again for all your efforts. Is there any other business to come before this body? Seeing none and seeing no reason to prolong this meeting, I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting, but before I do, just to remind everyone, our next regularly scheduled Board of Supervisors meeting is Tuesday, March 6, 2018. And we'll have a series of meetings that day, starting off with the 11:30 a.m. Audit and Finance Committee meeting, which is open to the public, followed by the 1:30 ribbon cutting ceremony at the Central High School, followed by the 3 p.m. regularly scheduled meeting here, and our 7 p.m. public hearings. The public is invited to attend all of those meetings. Encouraged and join us. That said, I will go ahead and declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much for coming. Travel safely.